This is a lens I've been really interested in trying for a couple of years, and the month I had with it was productive and informative. 2 years ago, Zhongyi Optics announced their latest Mitakon 85mm f2 iteration to equal amounts of excitement and skepticism. The Zhongyi Creator Series 85 f2 portrait lens represents a budget option for photographers not afraid of manual focus and a lens lacking direct camera communication. For photographers who use this lens, the Mitakon offers a lot of sharpness, offset by a lot of color fringing. The Mitakon 85mm comes with relatively little in the box: the lens, a leather sack, caps, and a basically useless piece of padding. The hood arrives in a bag included in the shipping box. It was a rather unceremonious presentation. One thing to note off the bat is that the packaging shows a lens formula. This actually, insofar as I can tell, is the formula for their retrofocus 35mm f2 lens. At any rate, the formula on the package was a retrofocus design. This lens, the 85mm, should use a double gauze design that looks like this one. However, I couldn't find anywhere that Zhongyi Optics had published their design for the Creator Series. This one made it to me indirectly from a gear-centered camera forum. As a note, I developed this drawing based on research, and so this is my own work, this drawing, this formula, and it should not be taken as gospel or assumed to be correct. The first noticeable quality that this lens exudes is build quality. The lens is all metal, and the construction and weight harken to a time when camera lenses were more robust than they are now. The grip and trim are milled for a comfortable feel, durability, and wear resistance. All the numbers are milled into the body and painted. Even if the lens paint is lost, the milling will remain, and the distance numbers, scales, and other vitals will be recoverable. This is a lens that is built to stand up to prolonged use and not have mechanical failures. The only item within this lens that feels cheaply made is the lens hood. The Mitakon 85mm f2 includes a plastic lens hood with a bayonet mount. The hood is suitable for preventing flare, but will not protect the lens in the event of a drop like a metal hood can. An improvement would have been to use a metal hood with a 55mm thread in lieu of a bayonet mount plastic hood. In the month that I had the Mitakon, the plastic lens hood had already started showing signs of wear from putting it on and taking it off the lens for shoots. By wear, I mean that the plastic dust had collected on the lens hood flange and on the lens itself's bayonet. If you buy this lens, do yourself a huge favor and also order a 55mm threaded telephoto lens hood in metal. Recycle this lens's plastic hood so it can be made into something more useful, like a park bench or a fleece coat. The focusing ring exhibits zero play. Adjusting the focus returns an immediate response from the front of the lens housing. The response is proportional and consistent throughout the lens range. The focusing ring also has appropriate resistance. The lens will not creep out of focus. But the resistance is not so much that focusing is difficult. In fact, focusing is enjoyable. This is the sort of lens that makes manual focus lens use fun. The aperture ring is the only interface element on this lens that feels like it isn't built out of recovered tank components. The ring does not have any play, is milled out of metal like the rest of the body, but slips in and out of the detents a little bit too easily. There's a slight stop and click, but moving beyond a detent is an easy thing to do. One nice aspect about this aperture ring, however, is that it does not have to stop at a full stop detent. That makes the lens's aperture effectively stopless and leaves a lot of room for creative lighting control. And since when you use it on your camera, you will most likely be using your camera in aperture priority mode, that allows you to really exert aperture control over your image with this lens. It's a huge benefit to this lens to have the aperture designed and built like it is. The front element on this lens moves in and out without rotating as you focus. This is preferred for lenses in general, as it allows the use of polarizing, variable neutral density, and gradient filters without the need to adjust them after focusing. This will help you with portrait work as well as product, macro, and landscape photography. If this lens did not have a Mitakon badge and the mount weren't shown, I'd forgive you for thinking that this is a new Pentax FA limited lens. The construction quality is on par with Pentax's best lenses and exceeds the quality of every modern Nikon and Canon lens I've used. The main handling difference between this and a brand name lens is that the Mitakon lacks a focusing motor or gear assembly. This has an added benefit, however, of making focusing silent and removing the vibrations associated with manual focus use of an autofocus lens. For videography, this is a great lens. The shallow depth of field combined with smooth and quiet focusing will make shots with different focal points attainable using on-set sound. That said, this lens is not a perfect manual focus lens. Basic lens optics dictates that when a lens moves or the aperture changes, the movement of light through the glass elements and therefore the lens itself also changes. This alters the focus point slightly. On the Mitakon, this is noticeable at f16 and f22 always, and sometimes at f11. In fact, the change of focal plane is so noticeable at f22 that refocusing would be necessary if it were possible to refocus with the viewfinder as dim as it is at f22. The focus point does shift slightly as you stop down, but for practical applications, this is a non-issue at the lens's usable apertures. By usable apertures, I mean that at f22 this lens is so soft due to diffraction as to be unusable for most anything. At f16 the performance is better in the way that having a Chevrolet Corvair is preferable to having no car. Sure, you have a car, but it actively wants to kill you. And sure, you have an image at f16 or f22, but it actively wants to destroy your reputation as a photographer. f11 is really the last usable aperture on this lens, but it performs the best at 5.6 and 8, or anywhere in that range where you would happen to set the aperture, since you can stop it between detents. So I know what you're thinking. All this is great. Let's see some sample photos from this Mitakon. All right, so let's do that. We're going to start off with some color photos. Here are 4 of my dogs, and you'll notice that these are a bit soft because color film itself is softer than a digital sensor in general, and definitely softer than black and white. And let's take a look here at black and white. Now these were all at f2, these black and white images, these 4. You can see that they're significantly sharper, and that's just a property of black and white film versus color film. Here is that same basic shot in digital, and you can see that this lens, even at f2 or f2.8, I believe this was still f2, captures portraits really well and has nice sharpness. Here are a couple of infinity focus tests. Here's one looking out from Mount Diablo in Walnut Creek, and this is just to test infinity focus, and you can see that it's a very sharp lens at infinity. Here's another one, same purpose. Even in a hazy day you still get ample detail. This is a juniper branch. So a lot of people call bokeh this whole out of focus area that's behind the juniper branch. That's incorrect. Bokeh is the characteristic shape of the out of focus area. The out of focus area is called the out of focus area. Now, as you can see, this lens wide open produces a very nice characteristic to the out of focus area. This is stopped down slightly. This was either f2.8 or maybe f4, probably f4 looking at the Nikon cap and body being in focus. And you can see that the out of focus area takes a slightly less smooth characteristic to it up here in the top right diagonal portion of the image. If you cut it diagonally, the top right triangle. And that's because of the shape of the aperture, and it's fairly close to circular on this lens, but not really the whole once you stop it down. But this is really a portrait lens, so let's take a look at some portraits. Here are two photos of Silastri, and these two photos of her were taken on film. And this would have been f2.8 or f4, I forget which. And you can see that there's a nice subject isolation, meaning that she appears to be standing away from a uniformly blurry background, and that's a very nice characteristic of a portrait lens, and that's something that this lens does exceptionally well. For portraits, this lens really shines. This image is a pretty good example of it. Here's one that's less of a good example, and mostly because the background in this photo sucks. But it still has a good amount of subject background isolation in this image. Now if we go to here a photo of me at f5.6, it's not quite as good. I was sitting on a tree. It's not like that's way in the background. But give me a break. This was after a 7-hour hike. I needed to sit on a tree when I took the self-portrait. So at any rate, in the background at f5.6, you can see it takes a slightly jarring characteristic on in the out of focus areas. And so it doesn't have the same amount of isolation as it did wider open. And it's also a little bit more distracting than the wide open background. Here's a photo of Jeff. This was almost as close as the lens can focus and still get a person's shoulders and head in the frame. Here's another one at f4 of Cynthia, and now you can also see it's very sharp. And this is not in any way a flattering photo of Cynthia. And this lens is not forgiving to your subjects. And if you want to have a classically modern, over-photoshopped, looks like the subject's actually a porcelain china doll, then this is not the lens for you. Even at f2, it is too sharp to be anything but a very honest portrait lens. Here's another photo of Silastri. This was as close as the lens can focus and still get a person's face entirely in the frame, which is about the minimum focus distance if I remember correctly. This would have been f4 as well, I believe. I really found that f4 is basically ideal for portraits. There's a little bit of color fringing with it, but the depth of field is appropriate for catching a person in focus with the background being still blurry. f2.8 is just fine for portraits, as is f2, but f2, if you get close to your subject, like this distance right here, is too narrow a depth of field. But if you stand back like the first photos of Silastri, f2 is just fine. Here's a photo of Robert. Even at f4, if you're close to your subject and the background's a good distance, now the tree off to the left that's out of focus is about 20 feet behind maybe 25 behind where I was positioning the subjects in this shoot. There's a nice, even at f4, subject background separation, but because of the f4 depth of field here, Robert's entire body is in sharp focus. So this series of hangs should have illustrated that the best aperture to use this lens at is for portraits between f2 and f4 or f5.6 if you have a non-distracting uniform background like a gray backdrop or something like that. So go on to some technical performance, which are all really boring pics, but they will help you get a sense of how this lens performs technically. Let's take a look at some sample videos, and I'm going to let these just play so you can hear the sound that comes from the lens as it's being focused and refocused, and see how the lens performs as a piece of video equipment. So for the next image test, I wanted to do a comparison. How would this lens compare to, because I'm on Pentax, what is considered Pentax's sharpest and best lens, and happens to be a portrait lens of a similar focal length. They're 77mm FA limited. We're going to take a look at 4 images from each lens here at f2, 2, 8, 4, and 5, 6. First, the FA77. Here is Robert, and you can see it's a little bit soft at f2 compared to what it can do, and the depth of field is really very, very shallow with it. Let's take a look at the 85. First thing right off the bat you're going to notice, depth of field is slightly shallower. Actually, that's not the first thing. The first thing you're going to notice is that Robert's a lot darker in this image. And the reason he's a lot darker is because the Pentax DSLRs, at least, were mismetering the 85mm f2. They were underexposing consistently by 2 stops. Interestingly, film cameras exposed properly, but the DSLRs consistently underexposed 2 stops. So the FA image, which is properly exposed, was a 1/20th of a second exposure. This one with the 85 is a 1/80th of a second exposure. So let's take a look at f2.8 on the FA limited. And you can see this is where it's really starts to get very sharp. And at this range, now bear in mind that these images you're seeing are 100% crops at 2000 pixels by 2000 pixels. And if you want to see the full-size image, check out the link to the Pentax forums review of this lens in the video's description, and you can see these images in full size. But at any rate, this is a pretty good example of what this lens can do at 2.8. The Mitakon at 2.8 is pretty darn comparable. Again, it's underexposed 2 stops. But if it hadn't underexposed, the images would really be very comparable images in terms of quality. Let's take a look at f4. Still on the FA, of course, very sharp because it's the 77. It's an amazing lens. F4 on the 85 is absolutely stunning. And you can see that even in the background areas, it's still got a nice out of focus quality. Let's go to f5.6 on the 77. And here, this is really where the 77 is at its best. This is its sharpest aperture, and if you have the subject placed well, you get out of focus blurring, but you get the entire subject in focus, as has happened in this image. And you can see the out of focus area on this image is still has a nice, pleasing characteristic to it. Now let's take a look at the 85. And to my eyes, the out of focus on the 85 starts to get a little bit jarring, but the rest of the image is still just as sharp as the 77. This is an incredibly sharp lens, and for the budget-conscious portrait photographer, this is a really great option for a lens that can take great high quality but very honest and detailed and in some ways unflattering images of people because it is so sharp. The last thing we're going to do here is we're going to scroll through a bunch of pictures of different subjects, and this is going to be where we are looking at 100% crop images right there. We're now going to look at full pictures of everybody. It's going to be a 77mm, then the 85. So you'll see each of my three subjects who volunteered to be tested, Jeff, Cynthia, and Robert. We'll go through and we'll see each of them at each aperture that is marked as that has a marked detent. So we will be skipping f16, but the rest of the apertures we're going to use. So what do my feelings on the Mitakon boil down to? Now, bear in mind that there are at least 3 versions of this lens, and the one that this video deals with is the newest, the Creator series. The previous versions have mixed to poor reviews, the first one being the poorest, the second one being better. But when it comes to this lens, my experience with it was, if I didn't already own the 77mm FA Limited, I would buy this lens. The only reason I don't is because I don't need it with the FA Limited. I'd have 2 lenses that do the same thing with a very similar maximum aperture. The construction and the interface on this lens harken back to a time when lens design and construction were significantly better than they are today. For $165 in the middle of 2015, you can find this lens on eBay brand new, direct from the manufacturer or their wholesaler. And again, in the middle of 2015, if you want to go to B&H and buy it, you can get it in a Pentax mount for $275, or a Nikon or a Canon mount for $200. The price of this is so incredibly low compared to similarly specified lenses in this range by the manufacturers and even by other third-party makers that it blows my mind how much quality in terms of optical performance and construction they've packed into this for so little money. How do you use this lens? As a portrait lens, technically the best thing to do when you use it is to set your camera to have a two-stop bias, overexposed by two stops, or bracket with a one stop between each bracket, and set it so that what your camera sees as a proper exposure is your first and lowest exposed image, and then you expose a stop over and two stops over. That's really the best thing to do with this camera from a technical standpoint to make sure that you get optimal photo performance out of this lens. Also, stop it down a couple of stops. Try to shoot it at f4 to 5.6 whenever possible, and try to avoid going to an aperture smaller than f8. f2 is very nice if you're in shade. If you're in a harsh lighting condition with heavy contrast, you're going to get a lot of purple and green fringing. That really calms down by f4, and it's basically gone by 5.6. Also, try to keep your backgrounds calm. They don't have to be a uniform gray wall or something like that, but avoid having things with lots of specular highlights and point sources and color transitions, and you'll find that the image quality on this lens improves even more, and the out of focus quality on it is the most noticeable improvement in that case. And the other thing is, use this lens on film. I was so struck by how well this lens performs on a film as a medium that were I to own this lens, I basically would not use it on digital because, well, if I didn't have an equivalent lens, I would. But I would use this lens on film in a heartbeat, especially black and white, because I think it performed at its best on black and white film and returned some incredible and amazing results. So this is my first ever video about a lens, and I hope that you guys found it helpful and informative. If this video was helpful, please give me a thumbs up. That lets me know I'm on the right track and that I'm producing content which is helpful to you. If you have questions about the Mitakon 85 f2 Creator Series, please leave those in the comments section below. I'm more than happy to answer those questions if I can. If there are other lenses you would like to see similar videos made about, let me know, and I'd be more than happy to try to get some more lens videos made. This was a really fun video to make, and I'd be happy to do it again. If you would like to subscribe, there's a subscribe link, and then you can find out when I have more photography videos that are released. And one last thing, thank you guys for watching, and take great photos.